Thank you so much, Sylvie. I'm sure, will you be around afterwards to answer any questions that people might have? Awesome. All I picture now is Sylvie with little buckets of money everywhere. Love that. Our final speaker of the day is Alison Humphrey. Alison plays with stories across the fields of drama, digital, media, and education. After starting out as an intern at Marvel Comics, which seems so cool to me, she produced one of the first ever online alternative reality games for Douglas Adams' Starship Titanic, initiated one of the earliest transmedia in-fiction blogs in a TV series, and co-created interactive live animated theater projects, the projects Faster Than Night and the Augmentalists. A Vanier Scholar at York University, her doctoral research explores how a science fiction transmedia story world, co-created with theater students on 4 continents, can empower youth civic engagement and public health problem solving. Alison's work is also part of the exhibition Public Notice that was curated by the RMG's Sonia Jones. So you can check that out after and speak to her about that. We had talked about the fact that maybe we could actually have her talk about her work in her space, but this group just won't allow it. We're in the great position that we have too many people, so she can engage you with that work afterwards. So I would like to invite up Alison, and please welcome her.
Another stretch. How many people in this room have one of these somewhere on your body? Okay, are you raising the arm that it's on? Yes, okay. So all of the other people are probably too young to have known smallpox. So that was a smallpox vaccination scar. It's basically the first human disease to have been eradicated from the face of the earth. And so far it's the only one, although we are getting close on polio. The process of vaccination was started 220 years ago when the world's first vaccine was invented. In 18th century Europe, the risk of death if you caught smallpox was about 30%, and another third of those infected suffered blindness. The rate was worse for indigenous people in the Americas who encountered this and many other diseases for the first time when the Europeans arrived. Ruth Cutten's trading series in the exhibition downstairs speaks to this invisible exchange. Before vaccination, many cultures tried to induce smallpox immunity through inoculation, which evoked the gardener's grafting technique of opening an eye, or an oculus, in a rootstock plant and inserting a bud from another plant into that eye. And in 1796, Edward Jenner published a technique for inducing smallpox immunity by inoculating a patient with the related but milder virus, cowpox, or variola vaccinii, which means cow. This 1802 satirical cartoon appeared just a few years later with the best side effect ever. So, who here was vaccinated for other diseases as a child? Now, who would vaccinate your own child now if you had one? Now imagine your child had a compromised immune system and couldn't be vaccinated. Who would want everybody else in this room to be vaccinated to prevent them from spreading disease to your child? Yep. So Eulabis on immunity and inoculation says, imagine the action of a vaccine not just in terms of how it affects a single body, but also in terms of how it affects the collective body of a community. That's the basis of herd immunity, also called community immunity, although I prefer the term co-immunity because it's just shorter and it doesn't evoke a feeling of being a sheeple. Co-immunity is created when enough individuals in a community are vaccinated to make it difficult for disease to travel from person to person. Co-immunity is threatened by growing vaccine hesitancy. Only a small fraction of those who are hesitant about vaccines are what's called anti-vaccination or anti-vaxxers or vaccine denialists. Most are just people who have heard conflicting advice and rumors from friends or from the internet and who are just not sure who to trust about this. Usually they are not young enough to have witnessed firsthand the vaccine-preventable diseases like rubella or polio, and therefore they're not as scared of the actual disease as their grandparents were. Shadowpox, the antibody politic, is an interactive installation designed to visualize the invisible effects of our seemingly private vaccination choices on the public health of those around us. This is what the installation looks like down the stairs in the exhibition Public Notice, currently on here at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. And let's see if this works. No, but that's okay because I'm going to skip the video in order to shorten to time. So, the visual language of the game is inspired by the design and spirit of Isotype, which is the international system of typographic picture education developed by the Austrian sociologist Otto Neurath to make statistical data legible and accessible to non-specialized mass audiences, and to encourage people to think of themselves and the world around them in terms of patterns, relationships, and systems of organization. The game is also inspired by Pokemon trading cards, which gives it much less street cred in an art crowd, but it also gives us a chance to do this. I just really love bad puns. The game is based around a choice. Get the vaccine or risk the virus. Before you make that choice, though, you have to choose where you're making that choice. You select a region from the world map, and then a country. We used real-world statistical data to make the game easier or harder based on 3 factors for the country that you choose. Its wealth, its GDP, its level of education, and its government spending on health. The game shows you the immunization rate in that country, and we based this again on real-life data. Measles vaccination rates from 1997, which is the latest date that we actually had access to all 197 countries in the world, divided in half, because Shadowpox is a newer disease than measles. My grandmother insisted that I reassure everybody that Shadowpox is in fact fictitious and you can't catch it. I have had a little kid ask me that. He was looking a little bit worried. So only then, after you've made all those choices, do you get to make your individual choice within that wider public health context. Your choice will raise or lower your country's vaccination rate for the next player who chooses that country. Here's the starting spreadsheet of real-world data that the game uses, compiled by Stephen Hoffman and Susan Rogers Van Cadwick, epidemiologist and scientific director. The game begins, and your avatar is infected with Shadowpox. To fight the disease, you move your hands to push the pox off your body. The dying virus particles, as they leave your body, shrivel up, fall, and eventually shrink to nothing. But before they disappear, they can infect the people around you. When one of your neighbors is infected, they go from jauntily healthy on the left to sluggish and sick. And a small percentage of those infected will die. So move now to just talking a little bit about the actual technology that we used. Technical director Lalaine Hewlett-Destaggio coded the game in Open Frameworks, which is an open source toolkit designed for creative coding written in C++. Ruler, R-U-L-R, is a toolkit for calibrating spatial media devices, for example, to get a projector and a Kinect to know how to work together. The Kinect motion sensor bounces structured infrared light off of the player, then it determines the position of 20 skeleton tracking points, and then Ruler uses this data to calibrate what the Kinect sees to where the projector projects. So in this case, it's to project onto the body of the player. This is Lalaine's Open Frameworks code to draw the player's avatar. The code chooses 2 of those skeleton tracking points, say the left shoulder and the elbow. It draws circles around them, and then it fills out the line between them to make a limb. This is what the avatar in progress, as we were designing it, looked like before the limbs were filled in between the circles. And then the final avatar. So that's how we use digital technology on purpose. I'm now going to talk a little bit about how we realized we were using it to say something that we didn't mean to say. Janet Murray in Hamlet on the Holodeck, The Future of Narrative in Cyberspace. I'm just going to say for a moment, I come from a theater background, so I was so excited when this book came out. I had fairly recently finished an MA in interactive multimedia at the Royal College of Art, and thought that I wasn't going to be able to kind of put my technology hat and my theater hat together, and then someone published something with a title like that, and everything was all right with the world. So she came up with the term procedural authorship, which is writing the rules for the interactor's involvement, that is, the conditions under which things will happen in response to the participants' actions. Ian Bogost, in Persuasive Games, picked up on this and expanded it with the concept of procedural rhetoric, which is the practice of authoring arguments through processes. In the early stage of development, our original idea for the Shadowpox game was simply that you fight the disease by moving the pox off your body with your hands. Fighting the disease would be easier or harder depending on whether or not you had decided to be vaccinated. However, what we eventually realized was that we had coded a blindness into the game's procedural rhetoric. When the pox left your body, it broke in half, shriveled, and fell to the floor. End of story. The game completely ignored the idea that there might be other people around you whom you might infect. It made everyone aside from you into what economists call an externality, out of sight, out of mind. This is how many of us make our vaccination decisions. We say, well, I'm healthy, and I never get the flu, so I'm just not going to get the flu shot. And we don't think about how we might pass the virus along to babies who are too young to be vaccinated, or to an elderly person for whom the flu can be life-threatening. So, to bring co-immunity into the game's procedural rhetoric, we added 99 neighbor sprites, or characters. Your score was then how many of them you infected as you fought the disease, or protected by having got the vaccine, and therefore you would have infected them. It's a very convoluted thing if you choose the vaccine. It's like an alternate future, people you have protected. As a result, we went from presenting an image of the individual in isolation, one person alone against a blank white field, to a portrait of the individual in context, one person within a community of 99 family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, and strangers. The game had finally found its heart. Turning now from how the piece was created, I thought I'd talk a little bit about a few practical issues that we experienced when Shadowpox, the antibody politic, came to be exhibited. Some are obvious. The electronic equipment we use is worth a few $1,000s, and it is expressly designed to be portable. We were lucky enough to borrow one of these expensive standing desk units when we exhibited in Geneva during the World Health Assembly last summer. But for the current exhibition, we had to go through a number of different ideas before we settled on our current configuration of bolting and locking the laptop on top of the aluminum truss. Another, only slightly less obvious issue: software never sleeps. I don't know if I really even have to explain this one. We started developing in 2016, then we exhibited in 2017, we revived it in 2018, and every time we had to do this for Windows, we just held our breath. But some issues are less obvious. In 2014, there was an exhibition in Madrid titled Picasso in the Studio, which displayed various elements from Picasso's studio, including 10 of the artist's palettes. Now, normally when an artist does not need to hand over all of the tools of their trade when they give you a work to put up in a gallery. But when the work is digital, this can change. Each time we showed Shadowpox, we had to down tools. We had to give up the use of a high-speed gaming laptop, a motion sensor that Microsoft stopped manufacturing in the middle of this process, and a specialized short-throw high-definition projector. We could only work on it when it wasn't in the gallery, unless we had access to another set of the exact same equipment. The original 6-week exhibition in Geneva had 2 identical projectors on either side, facing in opposite directions, enabling the projection of pox on the body of the player, as well as on the screen opposite them. But unfortunately for public notice here, it was impossible for me to lose both projectors in 4 months in the middle of my PhD research, which I'm in the middle of. So we had to sacrifice the one that projects the pox onto the player's own body, and we lost this effect. And I'm still a little bit sad about that. Next issue is light sensitivity. Obviously, this is an issue that's common to many artworks. Paint, paper, textiles, etc. must be shielded from ultraviolet light. But our installation had a problem with the other end of the spectrum. Last year's exhibition, Immune Nations, took place in 2 galleries. The first, in Trondheim, Norway, had an ideal room for us. It was painted completely black, the black box, and had boarded over windows. And then we move to this place. UNAIDS building in Geneva, which has the kind of soaring, light-filled atrium that architecture magazines love and infrared sensors hate. So to protect the sensor's ability to track and the strength of the projections that resulted, we built a tent by entirely covering the aluminum truss structure with curtains and a ceiling, leaving only a doorway so that passersby could look inside and work up the courage to go in and play. And that's a whole other thing with interactive work. How do you get the person to decide to interact? Audience participation in theater is like horrible. Everybody cringes back in their seat, like, no, don't pick me, please. So how do you make it enticing? We had to make a gap in our light protection. So I was worried that even that amount of light entering the doorway might be a problem. This, by the way, is the First Lady of Namibia. It is really, really cool to exhibit at the UN because you just never know who's going to stop by. So in order to make sure that we weren't going to have light interference, I found a website that tells you the direction of the sun will be shining on depending on the date and the location, and then figured out where the tent should be placed within the gallery and what time of day it would expect to escape the worst of the direct sunlight. And I can tell you that drawing this floor plan made me feel nerdier than every other bit of technology in the project put together. So the final issue that we dealt with was internet access. We wanted the game to save the players' choices and final scores to a Google spreadsheet. This was kind of because the Immune Nations project was a collaboration between artists and scientists and policymakers, and the science and policymakers were really big into data and, quantitative everything. And so the artists were sitting around thinking, how do we track? How do we evaluate? We were like grappling with things that lots of us had never really thought about before. And so we figured, all right, we have scores that are happening. Let's just save those to a spreadsheet, then we will have data. But what that meant was that the computer needed to access the gallery's Wi-Fi. And of course, this is tricky because for security reasons, most public Wi-Fi systems will kick you out after a certain amount of time. So we needed to have someone log it back in every so often. We also needed them to just shut down the computer and start it back up again every so often because that's what tech support tells you to do. But more important than all of that is the point at which the game invites the player themselves to go online. At the end of the game, you will receive your final infection score if you risked the virus, or protection score if you chose the vaccine. So your screen will look something like this. That is then translated in the next screen into a mysterious 3-letter code. We came up with this system because we wanted to leave players with more than just statistics. We wanted each one of those infected or protected neighbors to have their own story, to make each one's life feel as important in its way as your own. And thus the Poximon cards were born. Caitlin Fisher wrote 99 of these nano stories, that we call them, which we paired with 99 pictograms by Laramie Gann. Speaking of digital and collaborating with people on the internet, Laramie lives in Malaysia, and I found him through stock art online and then emailed back and forth because I needed a whole bunch of his work, and that was a lot of fun. So in the first version of the game, you would write your final score on a card, take it to a computer or your smartphone, and then you would be able to see on your unique Poximon collection in a website coded by Sean Solé. But when we had the chance to upgrade the game for this exhibition, we wanted to let players meet their collection without having to go online, because understandably, the percentage of people who take a card and then go off and visit the website after they leave the game or the gallery is pretty small. So we added the cards in on the last screen of the game. You could read them there right there in the gallery without having to take your web code somewhere else, though we still have the cards because it's a Poximon Pokemon card, and come on. Here's the cheat code if you want to read all 99 cards. Which brings us back to Eulabis, who writes, "Our bodies may belong to us, but we belong to a greater body composed of many bodies." My hope with this work is to learn a little bit more about how those of us who live in highly individualistic cultures can visualize ourselves within a greater body. Not just one composed of other humans, but the bodies of all the entities that share this world with us. How can we open an eye in the rootstock of our imagination and graft the bud of a new way to see ourselves in relationship? More and more, our survival seems to depend on such an inoculation. Thank you very much for imagining with me today, and I hope you will also come downstairs and play.
Thank you so much, Alison. It's awesome. Please do take advantage of Alison and play the game downstairs. We now are at the point of a reception. This first day has gone marvelously. Thank you so much for your participation, for the speakers. So please, thank you, Sylvie and the Canada Council for making all of this possible. Behind your little name tags, you will see a drink, little drink code thing. So please avail yourself of the bar. Anything after this first drink is your problem, not mine. So, and then Jenny Lewaint is a performance artist from Toronto, also a DJ. So she'll be playing while you mingle. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.